In today's video, I'm going to be comparing two very popular premium foam cannons. So I have the MTM PF22.2, and the .2 stands for the fact that this has a wider bottle compared to the previous version to stop it toppling over as much. And I also have the MJJC Foam Cannon Pro version 2 again, and this was sent to me by the brand about a year and a half ago. So to try and make this one as new as possible, what I've done is swapped out the filter for a new one and taken it apart and given it a proper clean so it's performing as well as it possibly can be. So I'm going to be looking at the different features of the two foam cannons and the performance to see which one is the best out of them. So for the first little demo, I'm going to be using quite a thick snow foam. So this is Autobrite Magifoam at a 1 in 10 dilution. So I just mixed this up in a measuring jug and then poured half into each foam cannon to make sure they had the exact same dilution. First up is the MTM, and you can see that it did produce a nice thick foam. Next up is the MJJC, and as you can see here, the foam is miles thicker and it really kind of goes on like shaving cream. And here is a sort of side-by-side comparison of the two foam cannons. I also wanted to try a second snow foam, so I went for a thinner one here, and this is Built Hamber Touchless, and I used 200ml of foam to 300ml of water, as this does need to be used at higher dilution compared to the previous foam. In the PF22, the foam was incredibly thin using this particular snow foam. In the MJJC, the foam was definitely a lot thicker, but again still relatively thin as I'd expect from this particular product. And again, here is just that side-by-side comparison so you can see the different consistencies of the foam. Now what those two little demos didn't take into account is how quickly the foam cannons are pulling up that solution from the bottle, and subsequently sort of the concentration of foam that's coming out of the end of the foam cannon. So I did a little test to see how quickly 500ml of solution was dispensed from each foam cannon, as that gives an indication as to how concentrated the solution coming out at the end is. And I also measured the total volume of solution that was dispensed through the foam cannons when you filled up the tank with 500ml, as of course the foam cannon and pressure washer are going to dilute whatever is actually in the bottle. And the results of this little test did indicate why the MJJC produces such a thicker foam in comparison to the MTM, because it took the MJJC just 50 seconds to dispense that 500ml solution, and the total volume of solution collected at that was 5.2 litres. Whereas with the MTM, it took 1 minute and 20 seconds to drain that same 500ml solution, and the total volume dispensed was 9 litres. So after a quick calculation, that actually means that the MJJC is pulling up 60% more solution compared to the MTM. This not only affects the actual thickness of the foam being produced, but also the concentration that's actually hitting the car, as this can make a significant difference in terms of the cleaning ability, which is for me the main aspect. To create a fairer test compared to the previous two demos, what I wanted to do was get them at the same panel impact ratio, which means that the concentration of foam that's coming out at the end is the exact same, so that requires an adjustment to the amount that's being added to the bottle to begin with. So to achieve a 1% panel impact ratio, when filling up the bottles with 500ml of total solution, the MJJC requires about 52ml of snow foam, and the MTM requires 90. And then the rest is just topped up to water to get to that 500ml mark, so I tried to measure this as accurately as possible. I would say the consistency is a little bit different. The MJJC still produces sort of a drier foam in comparison to the MTM, which produces a slightly wetter foam, which for some snow foams can increase the dwell time as the foam isn't so thick and dry and drags itself down the panel. The thickness, however, when the panel impact ratio is the exact same, looks pretty comparable to me. It's really a personal preference as to whether you'd prefer something like the MTM, where you're going to have to add a bit more snow foam into your tank in comparison to water to achieve a good panel impact ratio. Or if you don't mind something like the MJJC, where you're going to have to fill up the foam cannon quite often, but you won't have to put as much in to start with. Or you can just adjust that dial on the top to reduce the amount of foam that's being pulled up into the foam cannon, so it'll drain at a slower rate. Although you can get away with putting a lower concentration of foam into the MJJC foam cannon, it's not fair to say that it is more economical, because it really is a trade-off between that drain rate. So now onto the features of these two foam cannons. So they both actually have the option to adjust the spray pattern to either vertical or horizontal, which is a feature that not every foam cannon does have. On the MTM, the system for this is a bit nicer as it actually clicks into place when you switch between the horizontal and vertical pattern, and it has an indication on the plastic as to which position it's in as well. Both foam cannons allow you to adjust the spray pattern to be either a jet or a wide fan or anywhere in between. However, the system on the MTM is a little bit nicer again, as this part of the foam cannon can be easily adjusted without knocking the spray pattern from horizontal to vertical. On the MJJC, when you just do this with one hand, it is going to switch that pattern. So I think that front part could do with being a bit looser so you're able to adjust both settings independently. Another feature that both foam cannons have is the ability to control how much snow foam the cannon's actually pulling up by using that dial on the top. Again, I do think the MTM has the edge here, as this has a clickable function which does feel quite nice, whereas the MJJC just swivels. However, this difference is very minor and certainly not a reason why you would pick one over the other. So quickly comparing the plastic bottles on these, the plastic is a little bit thicker on the MJJC, you can't press it in at all, whereas you can a little bit, there's a bit more give on the MTM. Another more significant difference between the two is the neck design. Now, as you can see on the MJJC, there is a very wide neck, whereas on the MTM foam cannon, the neck is very, very small, which does make it a bit of a pain to actually pour the snow foam in. You have to either be incredibly careful and do it much slower, which is annoying, or just use a funnel. They both have graduations on the side so you can see the measurements, although I think the ones on the MTM are just a little bit clearer. I filled up the foam cannons with 300ml, 500ml and 1000ml of water to see whether the measurements on the side were actually accurate. At the 300ml mark, both the foam cannons were just a little bit over. At the 500ml mark, the MTM was pretty much bang on, but the MJJC was slightly higher here. And then at the litre mark, the MTM was bang on, but the MJJC was slightly over. The capacity of the MTM is pretty much bang on a litre. If you go over that, you're going into the neck of the bottle. Whereas on the MJJC, you can put around sort of 50 to 100ml extra in there. It says there's a 1.2 litre capacity, but I can't get that much in it. I also did a quick test to see if the bottles were leak proof, and the MJJC was totally leak proof. You can tip it upside down and nothing comes out of it. Whereas on the MTM, there's a little hole underneath the plastic where the water actually leaks out of, so I prefer the MJJC's design in that aspect. Another couple of features that the MJJC has over the MTM are related to the pickup pipe. Now firstly, it has a little metal ball on the end which helps you to be able to collect snow foam from the bottle when you're tilting it on its side and there's not actually much product left in the cannon. And also it does contain a filter, which the MTM foam cannon doesn't have. Another notable difference is that it's much easier to actually access the orifice on the MJJC foam cannon compared to the MTM, as the MJJC has an adapter that you can just unscrew and get straight to the orifice, whereas on the MTM you're going to have to use a spanner to actually remove the adapter. However, it is worth noting that that system on the MJJC can be a little bit of a pain if you plan on changing your pressure washers. I changed from a Karcher K4 to that quick release fitment and noticed that they actually glue the adapter in, so it took quite a bit of force to actually snap that glue and unscrew it, and I managed to do that without causing any damage, but I don't know whether I'd be able to do that again. If you don't want to go to the hassle of snapping the glue when you're changing a pressure washer, you can actually just get a whole new adapter, but these aren't that easy to find and are frequently out of stock from my experience. If you want to swap out the mesh filter or clean it, then the process is very similar with both cannons. There's a pin on the nozzle that just needs pushing out. It's a lot easier on the MJJC. On the MTM, I did actually have to use a hammer to get it out. Once that pin's removed, you can slide off the nozzle and then push the filter through the other end to get it out. On the MTM, there is just an extra piece of plastic that needs removing too. The gauze is actually a little bit different on both these foam cannons. On the MTM, you get a thicker metal piece, whereas on the MJJC, you get a felt piece that's sandwiched between two thinner metal pieces. Everywhere that I've seen that sells the MJJC Foam Cannon Pro also supplies it with a spare filter and a 1.1mm orifice. From what I've seen, most MTM foam cannons also come with that smaller 1.1mm orifice and a spare filter. However, there are a few resellers that don't actually list this in the description, so it is worth checking whether they actually supply that if you're ordering it from one of those. In terms of the build quality, both these foam cannons feel incredibly well made. The metal parts on the MJJC are made from brass, and on the MTM they're made from nickel-plated brass. On the MTM, the head is made from metal, and particularly the part that screws into the bottle. Of course, that is sort of metal on plastic, and could potentially strip the thread a bit faster on a plastic bottle, but I'm not sure whether this would actually cause any kind of issue long term. As I've had the MJJC for much longer, I have had more time to figure out if there are any issues with the design of it. And one thing that I did notice is that the blades at the front of the nozzle, which control whether it's a fan or a jet, are very, very thin. And they did actually bend out of position once, but I had to take that front end of the nozzle off, which was a little bit of a pain, and straighten that back up. On the MTM, I noticed that the blades are a lot thicker, so I can't imagine this ever being an issue here. In terms of which is my favourite out of these two foam cannons, I have to say that the edge goes to the MJJC. I think it has more useful features compared to the MTM. Another advantage is that it's around £15 to £20 cheaper in the UK compared to the MTM, and around $10 to $15 in the US. I do, however, think the MTM does have slightly better build quality, although I'll have to see whether it stands the test of time. I don't think the build quality is poor on the MJJC, there was just that slight issue I had with the blades at the front, but it was nothing that couldn't be rectified. Please let me know in the comments if you've tried either or both of these foam cannons and which you prefer out of the two. And as always, there'll be links to all the products in the description. If you have enjoyed the video, it'd be great if you could give it a like, and thanks for watching.